What are Helsings? They are a great many things to a great many people. To the peasant, they are armor-clad demigods. To the lord and lady, they are superb weapons and political tools. To the Jekyll, they are elite warriors and stalwart guardians. But, to me, Helsings are something far more ancient, made anew in the fires of our modern astral conflict. An old ideal of true nobility reforged alongside ruthlessness. Helsings, my dear boy, are knights. Mavis Drelvecca Corvus IV on her 400th birthday. A Knight's Rebirth, Part 1.
Look here, Dr. Wiener. This batch are developing nicely. They have been incubating a little longer than the average, but it's well within acceptable parameters,
spoke a man, gesturing for a woman near him to come closer. Tall, pale-skinned, and with orange eyes gleaming with excitement. He lurched over, lab coat fluttering due to the quickness in which he moved to gain a better vantage point. Before him, illuminating the dark and dingy operation from deep below, was the symphony of automated drones tending to their charges with pre-programmed vigor. These automated machines were quadrupedal, with many metallic tendrils protruding from atop their chassis. These snake-like appendages were whipping about enthusiastically, adjusting settings on control panels and operating valves. Surf drones, the automated servant machines of the sovereignty. However, their work here was more crucial than any other they could have been put to, for they were tending to specially crafted weapons which no single blade, firearm, or artillery could compare. The Helsings, spoke the woman by the name of Vina, following the other man's lead and leaning over to get a better look at the commotion below. She was quite a beauty by comparison to her companion, equally tall, with long blonde hair and refined features. Her eyes, as her companion's, were a bright orange. This was as it is for all crypta. Their species were universal when it comes to the subtle, sharp point to the ears, the coral colour of their irises, and the paleness of their skin, though there was one other unfortunate trait they all shared. They will soon be ready for basic conditioning. Requisition the necessary blood rations.
Of course, ma'am. There should be fresh shipments available. I heard reports of a fresh harvest on Bora 3. I'll make the order,
the man proclaimed, quickly striding away through the mechanized doors, exiting the lower operations station, and vanished out of sight. The doctor sat down at her console in the observation station and perused the documents outlining this new batch. Helsings, the name of the sovereignty's greatest fighting force, developed from artificially altered and enhanced vats of DNA. Every microelement of their genome was handcrafted to genetic perfection. No mother bears them, no father rears them, no preconceived attachments outside one another. The perfect soldiers. If it were possible with the knowledge and techniques employed by the sovereignty, they would be stripped of emotions and sentiency altogether. Alas, perhaps in the future, thought Vina, recounting all this within her own mind. It would certainly speed along the psycho-conditioning process. The good doctor, at this time, activated a second console next to her own and opened up the file entitled The Helsings, a Process. This document outlined the ways in which Helsings are made ready for battle after gestation. Though she could recite it word for word after all her years in the program, it had become a habit to read at this point. Index Alpha 2 Prelim Note. They, the Helsings, are put through a number of physical trials to establish any defects or abnormalities. See Idris's Manual to the Acceptable and Unacceptable Spectrum of Helsing Mutations, Volumes 1 to 3 for reference. If they are found, it is then the task of the attending high doctors to determine whether or not the defect is useful in its own way, or if it is a hindrance, If the latter is found to be true, the fledgling is executed on the spot, the corpse incinerated. Editorial note. In response to the freshly written, as of the date of this note, AM 26th of the 7th, 2551 at 11 hours by the grace of her might. Index Delta 187 clarification note. It is to be stated that following the outlined accepted and unaccepted Helsing mutations, as denoted in Idris Forgrim's manuals, does not in any fashion protect you from judiciary punishment or summary execution at the whims of those individuals within the sovereignty who hold the official title of Lord or Lady, or such titles of equal influence, should they choose to dole out such sentences. Index Alpha 2, Subsect 1. Helsings are put forth on a strict regimen after they exit their gestation pods, possessing bodies of approximately 17 years or so of physical maturity, though for a normal crypta, they would appear to resemble 20-year-old youths, mainly in general facial features. Once released, they begin their year-long militaristic education and societal indoctrination. They are to be taught how to speak basic Grimoire. See Index Epsilon 1, Decorum Note Outline for further details, the language of the crypta, as well as how to read and write it. They are also to be taught adept levels of arithmetic, science, battle strategy, and military history. However, absorbing such information is the simplest of tasks for Helsings. Their brains are sponges for information, and are, to put it lightly, intellectually astute. They process swathes of information at lightning-fast speeds, and internalize it all as one does the ability to walk on 2 feet. Their rearing is truly a marvel to behold. However, the initial onboarding of intellectual studies is a testing ground for any and all mental abnormalities. If they are found, the fledgling is executed immediately, the corpse incinerated. The surviving fledglings, once deemed up to standard, are put through a number of athletic trials to hone their already impressive physiques. Their physical form peaks several weeks before the conclusion of their rearing process. Once all processing and conditioning is completed, the fledgling Helsings are then retrieved from you, the hides. See Index Gamma 1 Subsect 1 for summary of hides, by the Helsings' older counterparts. The Helsings, being their own division after all, take the fledglings fresh from their year of rearing and begin incorporating them into their ranks. It is at this point hide researchers begin processing the next assigned batch.
Anomalous readings detected,
declared a feminine computerized synthetic voice. It sounded off from the console in which Vina was working after she began processing the scans of the gestation pods. She quickly began analyzing the report provided by the drones below, and was surprised indeed. A female, she thought to herself. We haven't had that occur in nigh on millennia. Vina stood up and began her trek down to the lower lab, curious to confirm the drone's findings. After all, females amongst the Helsings were more or less 1 in 10,000. Cloning facilities only produced them in batches of 100 to begin with. Suffice it to say, it was more often than not an error or a faulty scan than to be an actual female. Though female Helsings were not considered a defect or intrinsic negative, they were noted to be an oddity. Despite a different sex, their overall muscular strength, height, and bone density were identical to their brothers. The only major noted difference, other than their sex organs, were their innate psychic abilities. Females had a stronger inclination towards telepathy and telekinesis, which could result in extreme emotional volatility. It doesn't help that all of this is based on only 2 prior iterations of them occurring, Vina thought to herself as she reviewed all this in her head. As she made her way to the lifts which would ferry her down to the lower lab, she wondered to herself the potential this event might present. It's not every day a hide gets to study a female Helsing, Vina thought to herself. Perhaps I'll make some breakthrough in our understanding as to why this anomaly occurs. Due to just how few times female Helsings have been produced, no one has been able to ascertain the causality of their existence. Not that it's an important issue, but curiosity is something not easily dissuaded. After a few moments in the lift as it rushed downward, Vina felt the deceleration and eventual stop. Next to the door of the lift, the access panel blinked alive and the computer's voice rang out.
To access lower laboratory, please place hand on panel and recite access code.
Vina did as instructed, and the lift opened sharply. The lower lab was almost pitch black, though this presented no issue for a crypter. The only light was produced from the gestation pods, a bright, dingy red color, too bright to be mistaken for blood, but one could be forgiven for making that mistake at first glance. The cylindrical pods were assorted on either side of two walkways, which were thick, elevated glass hatches faced at an incline. The pods were easily 9 feet in length and 5 foot in diameter. Vina quickly strode over to inspect the designated pod from the alert, surf drones instinctively giving their master a wide berth while doing their best to attend to their duties. After walking along the aisle of pods, she finally found the designated pod, number 13512, and sure enough, inside the bubbling solution was a juvenile female Helsing. Though the red liquid she resided in slightly obscured her appearance, Vina could make out her long silvery blonde hair slowly flowing and twisting about, her toned muscular build, and of course, as with all Helsings, her imposing height. Though the ventilator covering her nose and mouth made it impossible to tell, Vina noted she was probably fair-featured. Even factoring in the pod being elevated above the ground atop a strong metal foundation, Vina knew all too well that, if this girl was standing directly in front of her, she would be straining her neck slightly to look up at her. She must be at least 7'4", 7'6" even. Vina spoke aloud, not particularly to anyone or anything, but despite not seeking a response, a nearby drone responded. After a short click and tuning sound, a flat, unemotional, metallic voice said,
Subject number 13-5-12 is exactly 7.52624 feet in height.
I see. The ventilators are all functioning normally, correct? Oxygen levels being maintained up to standard parameters? Vina inquired, doing her best to feel fully justified in the decision to come to the lower lab. After all, she could have had the drones double-check their scans and send telemetry to her station, as opposed to going to check in person. The drone approached closer, its details highlighted in a red hue by the pod's emanated light. The drone's drooping oval chassis bobbed a bit as it closed the distance. Atop its body was the source of its versatility, the artificial brain contained within a thick glass dome which protruded somewhat. It was green, oddly shaped, and seemingly convulsing in regular intervals.
Affirmative. All vitals stable. Final gestation underway.
How long until they are released from the... Just as Vina was about to finish her query, an alarm sounded within the lab, and the feminine robotic voice sounded.
Gestation completion imminent. Amniotic fluid now draining. All primary high natality teams report to the lower lab.
At these words, Dr. Vina quickly ran to the lift and ascended to the upper lab to join her team. The gestation period had always been fickle, and she knew as much. To go down there so close to final gestation was foolish and short-sighted, but thankfully she still had time to muster with her team, don the proper equipment and supplies needed to aid the fledglings out of their pods, and begin processing them. Dr. Vina burst out of the lift and made her way at a jog to another sub-lab on the upper level, where the assigned hides were assembling. Once she reached the lab, she noticed most of the team was just finishing up preparations to head down, so with little ceremony, she flung off her lab coat and quickly contorted into her hazmat suit. The team, after waiting a few short minutes for Vina, began their march down to the lower lab. Notable amongst them were 2 jackals, soldiers of the Sovereignty's army, armed with standard-issue Mark IX rifles. Their role in all this was to put down any overly hostile and primal Helsings that emerged from the pods. If possible, that is, though the scenario in question was rare. In fact, the last incident of a Helsing going berserk was, as far as the good doctor was aware, nearly 3 centuries ago. The Jekylls were in their full combat equipment. Tough metal braces, greaves, dark-hued trench coats signifying their regiment, sharp uniform pauldrons, and full helmet. The metals that made up their armor were made out of an alloy unique to the core worlds of the mighty sovereignty, nectarium. As a relatively light and dense metal, simple blades and archaic ballistics did very little to scathe it. Despite all of that, they were unlikely to do very much if one of the Helsings ended up going berserk and were able to react before they could intervene. The team exited the lift into the lower lab just as the computer voice rang out.
All pods successfully drained of amniotic fluid. Now deactivating locking mechanisms.
As the computer's voice spoke those words, a ripple of metallic latches could be heard clacking open simultaneously.
Locking mechanisms successfully disengaged. Pod hatches now opening.
A loud hissing noise preceded this declaration as the sealed pod doors slowly began to hum open.
"All right, we all know the procedure. Get to it,"
said a tall, pale, and dark-haired older man at the head of the group. His bushy moustache bristled as he tensed up, his luminescent orange eyes darting across the assortment of hides exiting the lift. The man was Notice Tegral, the head researcher of the lab, and by far the oldest amongst those present, over 320, according to rumors. As instructed, each hazmat-clad hide set forth down the aisles of pods and began checking vitals of the Helsings. The 2 Jekyll soldiers remained with Dr. Tegral by the lift, just in case the worst should come to pass. Paying them no mind, Vina made a direct rush over to pod 13512. This would be her only opportunity to sneak a blood sample from the female without drawing suspicion. But the potential revelations of the cloning process and its anomalous nature was well worth the potential scrutiny. Hopefully. After coming to a stop in front of the pod, Vina looked into it. Without the amniotic fluid and with no ventilator to obscure the female Helsing's features, Vina realized the girl's beauty far exceeded what she had gleaned earlier. Her soft, gentle face, her flowing, silk-like silver hair and shapely visage all gave the impression of a noble princess from some long-forgotten fairy tale. Shaking off the initial surprise, Vina mindlessly took off her helmet to unobscure her vision, opened her medical case, pulled out a syringe, and leaned in to collect the blood sample. The tip of the needle struggled to break the thick skin, but luckily it managed to just barely seep into the flesh and then into the vein. However, before Vina could even begin to secure the vial, she blinked, and a large hand wrapped around her throat. The constriction that followed was not gradual. In an instant, Vina felt as though a large serpent was attempting to crush her windpipe and snap her neck. It was the Helsing girl. Her crimson eyes were open wide, while her expression completely flat and emotionless, as her hand grappled onto Vina's throat. Slowly losing consciousness, with her eyes nearly popping out of their sockets, Vina let both the syringe and vial drop and began to flail at the once unassuming arm. Its previously soft appearance, now with the added tension of gripping something, revealed a sharp and imposing, toned musculature hidden beneath the perfect skin. The poor doctor had time for a single, fleeting thought to cross her mind. How is this happening? Why? With a resounding crunch and snap, Dr. Vina stiffened and then went suddenly limp.